My roommate always seemed distant and unapproachable, popular, confident, different. But that night, he walked into the room at a moment when I was most vulnerable. Our eyes met, and everything that seemed clear suddenly changed. This is not a story about sensation. It's a story about silence, acceptance, and that fragile moment when someone dares to be themselves. I wasn't supposed to feel safe. Not in that room. Not around him. But that night, for the first time, I did. The air was still, and the hum of the hallway light barely reached inside. I had just come out of the shower, the warmth still clinging to my skin like a soft armor. It was one of those rare moments when I felt like I could exhale without worrying who was watching. Noah, my roommate, was supposed to be out. Probably with friends, or on another date he wouldn't remember the name of. That's how it always was. He came and went like he had nothing to prove, and I stayed in the corners of the room, always too quiet, always watching him live the kind of life I wasn't sure I could ever touch. I moved slowly, letting the quiet settle in my chest. I reached for a shirt, not rushing, because I was sure I was alone. And then the door opened, fast, sudden, without warning. He walked in with a burst of energy and a half-laugh that died instantly. Our eyes locked. He froze. I froze. The shirt slipped halfway over my head, forgotten. My hand stilled. He stood in the doorway like someone had cut the sound from the world. No words came. He didn't look away. His eyes did move, lower, briefly, but they came back to mine. Not wide in surprise. Not flinching. Just holding. I should have moved. Covered up. Said something to break the tension. But I didn't. I couldn't. Because he wasn't reacting the way I expected him to. There was no awkward chuckle. No immediate retreat. He just stayed. You always walk around like this when you think I'm not coming back. His voice was quiet. Rough, but not mocking. I tried to laugh. Didn't think anyone would come back this early. Noah stepped inside just a bit. The air in the room felt different now. Charged in a way that didn't feel dangerous, but real. Real and sudden. He didn't come any closer. His hand hovered by the edge of the desk like he needed to hold on to something, or maybe just needed to feel grounded. I didn't mean to walk in on anything, he said, softer now. I can head out. You're good. My voice didn't sound like mine. It was too tight, too still. He looked at me again, then back toward the door. His jaw worked like he was chewing on something he couldn't say. It wasn't weird, he added. Just unexpected. Yeah, I said. Unexpected. He nodded once and left. The door clicked behind him. And I just stood there, shirt still half on, my heart pounding in a way I didn't expect from such a quiet moment. It should have been nothing. A roommate walking in at the wrong time. Happens all the time in dorms. But it didn't feel like nothing. The way he looked at me wasn't casual. It wasn't passive. It was something else. Curious. Heavy. I went to bed that night and stared at the ceiling for hours. I wasn't waiting for him to come back, but I noticed that he didn't. I wasn't counting the minutes, but I felt every one of them. I wasn't obsessing, but I replayed that look in his eyes again and again. The next morning, he was already there when I woke up, sitting on his bed, scrolling his phone. He didn't usually wake up before me, and when I opened my eyes, he looked up fast, like he'd been waiting for me to move. Yo, he said. Morning, I replied. He didn't leave, didn't pretend it hadn't happened. He just stayed, letting the silence grow. About last night, he started. It's fine, I said too quickly. I didn't mean to make it weird. It's not, I lied. He paused. Okay. But he didn't move. He watched me for a second longer than he needed to. I could feel it. Not obvious. Not intense. Just a presence. When I turned to grab my toothbrush, his voice stopped me. I've never had a roommate like you before, he said. That's not a bad thing. I mean, you're just different. I looked at him. Different how? He shrugged. You don't pretend. Most people do. It's refreshing. I didn't know what to say to that. So I nodded. He smiled, but it wasn't his usual smirk. It was softer, like something behind it had shifted. Later that day, he didn't go out like usual. He stuck around, played music on his phone, sat on his bed scrolling nothing. Occasionally asked what I was working on. Nothing big, just present. And somehow that felt louder than anything he could have said. I couldn't read him. I didn't want to, but I could feel it. Something between us had changed. Not in a dramatic, movie-like way. Not in sudden declarations or accidental kisses. It was in the silence. in how he looked at me without looking away, in how, when our arms brushed as we both reached for the same cup, he didn't flinch. And neither did I. The next morning, silence didn't feel like avoidance. It felt deliberate, like neither of us wanted to rush into defining what couldn't yet be named. Noah didn't bring up what happened, and I didn't either. We moved around each other like nothing had changed, but it had. I felt it in the way he looked at me. Less absent, more present. The usual awkward shuffle of early classes and brushing teeth in silence carried a new energy. Charged, not heavy. Quiet, not cold. He was already awake when I got up, sitting on the edge of his bed, scrolling through his phone. Normally, he'd sleep through half the morning and mumble something about skipping class. But that day, he lifted his head as soon as I stirred. His eyes flicked toward me, quickly, then back to his phone. No greeting, no questions, but it said more than words. I stood at the sink brushing my teeth, and through the reflection, I caught him glancing again. Small, careful, not accidental. Later, after we both left for the day, I expected him to disappear again, slipping into his usual orbit of campus life. Gym, friends, flirting with girls without even realizing it. But when I came back that afternoon, he was still there, still sitting on his bed, still scrolling. That alone wasn't new, but the way he stayed was. "How was class?" he asked. It was the first time he'd ever asked me that. I paused mid-step, not expecting the question. "It was fine," I said slow. "Nothing special." He nodded. "You look tired." I shrugged, tossing my backpack onto the floor. "I guess I am." Normally, that would be it. End of conversation. But he kept watching me, head tilted slightly like he was waiting for more. That night, I was buried in a paper, my fingers flying over the keys, eyes tired. Noah was lying on his bed, tossing a stress ball into the air over and over, catching it in one hand without effort. That sound had always been background noise, but now it felt rhythmic, familiar. "You work too hard," he said. I didn't look up. Some of us don't coast through on charm and confidence. I expected him to laugh. He didn't. "I mean it," he said. "You always look like you're carrying too much." I finally turned my head. "That's rich coming from you." He looked at the ceiling, as if the right words were hiding up there. "I guess I don't know how to carry anything." The silence that followed wasn't tense. It was open. The next few days followed a strange pattern. He stopped leaving the room so quickly. Sometimes he sat on his bed, headphones in, pretending to scroll while watching me type. Sometimes he'd ask small questions, what I was working on, what I thought about some random song, what I wanted to do after school. Questions that didn't seem loaded until I realized he was actually listening. He started noticing things, like when I skipped dinner because of a deadline, and he tossed a protein bar onto my desk without a word. Or when I was about to head to the library, and he asked if I wanted company. I said no the first time, but the second time I said sure. We didn't talk much that evening. Just sat next to each other at a long table, typing in sync. Every now and then, I'd feel his foot brush mine under the table, and he wouldn't pull away. Neither would I. One night, I dropped the notebook and bent down to pick it up at the same time he did. Our hands met. We both froze. Not long, just long enough. His fingers didn't pull back immediately. There was a tension there, subtle and unspoken. And then he straightened, clearing his throat, making it seem like nothing. But I felt it. The way his gaze held mine for that half second too long. The way he didn't seem confused, only scared. The next night, I sat at the desk reading, and he leaned over my shoulder without warning to look at the screen. "You always read this kind of stuff?" he asked. His voice was too close. His breath touched the side of my neck. I try not to react. "It's for class." "Oh." He didn't move away. I could feel his eyes on the words, but I knew he wasn't really reading. I stayed still. My pulse climbed. Then he stepped back without a word, returning to his bed, and said nothing for the rest of the night. Another day, I was lying on my side scrolling through emails, and he sat down at the edge of my bed. I blinked, confused. He'd never done that before. "You okay?" he asked. "Yeah." "What?" "You seem off." I raised an eyebrow. "You've never asked me that." He didn't laugh. "Yeah, well, maybe I never noticed." I sat up slowly. "And now?" "I don't know. You just seem, I don't know, like you hold your breath a lot." That caught me off guard. I opened my mouth to respond, but couldn't find words. He stood up again, paced once across the room like he didn't know what to do with himself. "I'm not trying to mess with you," he said suddenly. "If I'm making things uncomfortable." "You're not." I interrupted too fast. He looked at me. Really looked. Okay. That was all he said. But from that night on, the space between us wasn't passive anymore. It was active. Felt. Filled with looks that weren't quite stares. Touches that weren't quite accidents. I started to catch myself waiting for him to come back each night. Not because I was hoping for anything, but because I didn't know what it would feel like if he stopped. He started brushing past me in the small space between our beds more often. Shoulders bumped. Arms grazed. Once I stepped back and he caught my elbow lightly, just a reflex, but he didn't let go right away. I looked at him. He looked back. Neither of us spoke. Some nights, we stayed up later than usual. He'd sit on the floor near the edge of my bed, talking about high school, his old dog, the time he almost failed chemistry and blamed it on the teacher. I listened, really listened. And when I talked, he did too. Not with distraction. With attention. That was new. I found myself memorizing how he listened. The small tilt of his head. The way his eyes didn't dart away like most people's did when I got too personal. One evening, I was struggling with a class reading. He came over and leaned down to read over my shoulder again. His hand braced on the desk beside mine, close enough for his fingers to brush mine. He didn't move them. The air between us felt like it held more than either of us was ready to name. I looked at him. He looked at me. And then he said, "This story's depressing." I laughed. The tension cracked slightly, just for a second. But it didn't disappear. It hung there just under the surface. Later, I turned off the lights and got into bed. I expected the quiet. I even welcomed it. But as I lay there, I heard him shift in his bed. And then, "You ever feel like you're waiting for something and you don't know what it is?" he asked into the dark. I didn't answer right away. Then, yeah, the silence that followed wasn't empty. It was a question neither of us knew how to ask. But we were both already answering it, slowly, carefully, one shared look at a time. The party wasn't my idea. I don't like crowds, or loud music, or pretending to enjoy conversations that feel like running through static. But Noah had asked. Not pushed, not joked his way into it, just asked. "Come with me," he'd said, almost casually. "You don't even have to stay long." I didn't say yes immediately. But the way he looked at me, open, hopeful, like it actually mattered to him if I was there, made me nod before I could talk myself out of it. And so I went. It was already full when we got there. People spilling out of rooms and down the hallway. Music bleeding through the walls. Everyone either yelling to be heard or laughing like it didn't matter. Noah disappeared almost instantly, swept into a tide of greetings and high fives and drinks shoved into his hand. I watched him for a while from the edge of the room, clutching a cup of soda and pretending I belonged. He was glowing, not literally, but close enough. The kind of glow that came from being wanted. The way people moved toward him, touched his arm, leaned into him. It was like gravity. And then I saw her. Short hair, too much perfume, laugh loud enough to cut through the bass. Her hand on his arm like it had been there forever. He leaned in, said something, and she laughed even louder. Her hand didn't move. Neither did he. And that was it. Something inside me tightened. Not with anger. Not even sadness. Just clarity. Like a cold gust of wind cutting through a dream. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't look at him again. I just turned and left. The walk back was fast. I didn't want to think, but my mind was racing. By the time I stepped into our room, the quiet hit me like a wave. I sat at my desk, laptop open but untouched, the screen glowing blankly. My thoughts were louder than any music at that party. Why did I care? Why had I expected anything different? He was always going to be Noah. Magnetic, effortless, straight. And I was just the guy who shared his space. Who let his hand brush mine and pretended it didn't mean anything. Who felt everything too deeply and said nothing. The door opened hard. He stepped in, breathing sharp like he'd run back. "Dude," he said, voice tighter than I'd ever heard it. "What the hell?" I didn't turn. I left. I said simply, "Yeah, no kidding. You didn't even say anything. I didn't think you'd notice." His steps came closer. "Why wouldn't I notice?" I turned then, met his eyes. "You seem busy." He didn't blink. "Is that what this is about?" I don't know what this is. We stood in silence. His fists clenched at his sides. Mine stayed in my lap, holding nothing. He exhaled, looked down, then back up. You just walked out. You didn't stop me. I didn't know I was supposed to. I guess you weren't. Another silence. Longer. You're mad, he said finally. No. You sure? I stood. I'm not mad. I stopped myself. What? I'm confused. And tired of feeling like I have to keep pretending I'm not. He blinked, visibly caught off guard. Pretending what? That I don't notice how things have changed. That you haven't been different lately. He took a step closer. What do you mean different? You've been around more. You ask about my day. You sit too close and don't move when we touch. You look at me when you think I'm not watching. He didn't deny it. I kept going. You make it feel like maybe something's happening. But then I see you with someone else, and I remember who you are. Who you've always been. He swallowed hard. I didn't mean to. I know, I said quickly. That's the thing. I know you didn't mean anything by it, and I'm the idiot for hoping it did. You're not an idiot. I laughed bitterly. Sure feels like it. No, Jess. His voice was lower now. You're not. I turned away, facing the desk again, not wanting to break. Then tell me, what are we doing? What is this? He didn't answer right away. When I glanced over my shoulder, he was looking at the floor like it held the answers. I don't know, he admitted. Of course you don't, I whispered. He looked up, but I'm not pretending either. I stared at him. Then what are you doing? He ran a hand through his hair, trying to figure out why I feel like something's missing when you're not around. Trying to understand why I keep thinking about that night I walked in and didn't want to leave. I turned around slowly. Noah, I don't have the words, he said. I wish I did. I don't know what this is, but it's not nothing. We stood there. No more defenses. No more pretending. Just breath between us, heavy and uncertain. I'm scared, he said softly. Not of you. Of what this means. I nodded. Me too. But I notice everything, he added. Every time your voice gets quiet. Every time your eyes drop when I get too close. I notice. And I keep coming back. I couldn't breathe for a second. I don't need you to define it, I said. I just need to know I'm not imagining it. You're not. He stepped forward, slowly, until he was standing right in front of me. I don't know what happens next, he said. Neither do I replied. He reached out, hesitated, then rested his hand on my arm. Light, careful, present. We didn't kiss. We didn't even move. We just stayed there, two people suspended in a moment neither of us could label. But both of us knew it mattered. And that was enough. For now. After that night, things didn't return to normal. But they didn't fall apart either. They simply shifted. We didn't revisit the conversation. There was no recap, no unpacking of what was said. But it lingered, in the quiet, in the way we looked at each other without looking away, in how the air between us no longer tried to cover its own tension. Noah didn't retreat. He didn't make himself scarce or pretend nothing had happened. Instead, he was just there, not trying too hard, not saying too much, just present. It wasn't forced. It wasn't performative. It was steady. And slowly, I began to understand what presence meant. Some evenings, he'd come back from class, drop his bag, and sit without saying a word. Sometimes on his bed, sometimes on the floor near mine. He didn't talk much at first, and I didn't ask him to. I learned to leave space for his silences, not as punishment, not as waiting, but as an offering. A kind of understanding you don't have to speak to be heard. One night, I was reading at my desk when I heard him shift behind me. I thought it'd feel clearer, he said suddenly. I turned. What? All of it, he said, not looking up. I thought saying it out loud would fix the confusion. But it didn't. I didn't answer right away. Then I said, maybe it's not about fixing anything. That was enough. He nodded slowly, letting the thought settle between us. It became like that, these quiet interjections. Honest, unpolished, never needing replies. I never tried to explain his feelings for him. I didn't try to turn silence into answers. And I think that's what let him stay. He asked me things now, not just about school or books, but about things that mattered. What scared me as a kid. What I thought about when I couldn't sleep. If I ever imagined leaving everything behind. He didn't always respond to what I told him, but he listened. Fully. Like my answers meant something. In return, He gave pieces of himself, fragmented, tentative. Stories about his parents' silence, about a teammate who came out in high school and how everyone handled it by pretending it hadn't happened. About the night he realized he was watching me more than he watched anyone else, and how that terrified him. He never said those things dramatically. He'd say them with a kind of quiet confusion, like he didn't quite trust the truth coming out of his own mouth. But it came out anyway. Once he said, "I don't think I'm like you. I don't know if I feel things the same way." I didn't ask what he meant. He continued, "But I know I feel something, and when I try to ignore it, it gets worse. Not louder, just emptier." That stuck with me. We didn't touch much. That felt important. Maybe because we didn't want to risk breaking what we had. Maybe because neither of us knew what that kind of contact would mean yet. But sometimes our shoulders would brush in passing. Sometimes his hand would rest next to mine a little longer than necessary. It was subtle, like the gravity between us had its own quiet pulse. There was one night when we stayed up late talking about music. What we used to listen to in middle school. What songs made us feel like we were somewhere else. We shared earbuds, leaning against the wall in silence. He didn't look at me. I didn't look at him. But we didn't move. When the last song faded, he took the earbud out slowly and said, "I don't want this to be a phase." I turned toward him. He was already staring at the floor. "I don't want it to be something I explain away later. Like, yeah, that was just a weird time." "Then don't let it be," I said. He nodded, but I could tell it still scared him. There were other small moments. Like when we were walking back from the library one evening and he said, "Sometimes I wish I could pause this. Not stop it, just slow it down so I can keep up." I told him he didn't need to rush. "I know," he said. "It just feels like if I don't figure it out fast enough, I'll ruin it." "You won't," I said. "This isn't something you have to win. It's not a race." He looked at me, eyes softer than I'd ever seen them. "It feels like it matters." It does. That was the first time we let it settle like that. Let the truth hang between us without reshaping it into something safer. Still, there were setbacks. Some days he'd be distant. Not cold, just somewhere else in his mind. I gave him room. I didn't pull him back. I let the silence stretch, trusting he'd return on his own. And he always did. Other days, he'd be closer. He'd sit beside me during meals. Ask what I thought about things he wouldn't normally care about. Books, articles, dreams. He was learning to meet me in my world. I think the hardest part was not expecting too much. Knowing he was trying, not always perfectly, not always bravely, but honestly. One afternoon, I found him standing by the window, arms crossed, lost in thought. "You okay?" I asked. He shrugged. "I want to be. Want to talk about it?" He hesitated. Then, "I'm just scared I'll change my mind." I didn't react. I let the sentence sit. He looked over his shoulder at me. "Not because of you. Because I don't know how to carry this long term. I've never had to." I nodded. "Then carry it one day at a time." He nodded back, slowly. "That's all I can promise." That's enough. Eventually, we got better at being in the same space without filling it. We didn't rush to fix every quiet moment. We let them exist. Sometimes, he'd sit beside me and say nothing. Other times, he'd ask a question that made my chest ache, because I knew it took him everything to ask it. "Do you think people always know what they want?" he asked once. "Not always," I replied. "Do you?" "Some things, yeah. Like this." I paused, then said, "Yes." He didn't answer, but he stayed sitting beside me for a long time. It was never about labels. We never called it anything. But we knew. Every glance, every pause, every moment of being brave enough to stay in the same room with our truths, it built something. It wasn't romance. It wasn't friendship. It was something in between and maybe beyond. It was a space where we didn't need to explain ourselves. And that was what made it real. Morning didn't arrive with noise or urgency. It just drifted in quietly, like it was trying not to wake anything too soon. Jesse stirred before his thoughts did. For a few seconds, he didn't remember where he was or what day it was. Just warmth, the kind that didn't come from a blanket. He shifted slightly and felt it. Another body, close, steady. Noah's arm was loosely around him, not gripping, not tentative, just there. Resting gently across his side, like it had found its place during sleep and never questioned it. Jesse didn't move. He barely breathed. It wasn't the position that startled him. It was the stillness of it. The fact that Noah hadn't pulled away in the night. That he was still there. It had taken them weeks to get here. Not to the closeness, but to the trust. To this moment, where touch wasn't something to overanalyze. Where silence didn't demand a retreat. Noah didn't stir. His breath was slow and calm. Jesse could feel it against the back of his neck. Constant, reassuring. The fear that had been living in Jesse's chest lately didn't surface like it used to. It was there, but quieter now. Not gone, but no longer in control. He lay there for a long time, not wanting to break the stillness. Not wanting to find out if it had only been a moment of weakness or an accident of comfort. But when Noah shifted slightly behind him and murmured something under his breath, Jesse felt his fingers tighten briefly against his side. That simple movement told him everything he needed. "You're awake," Noah said, voice low and rough with sleep. "Yeah," Jesse whispered. Neither of them moved. "I didn't mean to fall asleep like that," Noah added. Jesse smiled faintly, still facing away. "It's okay." Noah was quiet for a beat. "I thought I'd wake up and panic." "Did you?" "No." That word held more than it should have. Jesse finally rolled onto his back, slowly, giving Noah the chance to move if he wanted to. He didn't. They faced the ceiling for a while, side by side, still not quite looking at each other. Then Jesse asked, "What happens now?" The question wasn't meant to pressure. It was barely a question at all, just a quiet release of breath, like letting something go before it grew too heavy. Noah turned his head. His eyes found Jesse's. "I don't know," he said honestly. "Maybe we don't have answers." Jesse nodded. Noah continued, "But I know I don't want to hide anymore." That made Jesse close his eyes briefly, overwhelmed not by the words, but by how simply they were said. No big declaration. No apology. Just truth. When he opened his eyes again, Noah was still looking at him. Jesse reached out, slowly, and let his hand rest near Noah's. Not quite touching. Not quite asking. Noah moved his fingers without hesitation, lacing them between Jesse's. It was the smallest gesture, but it was everything. There were no words after that. None were needed. They lay there in the quiet, not trying to define anything, just existing beside each other in a way that felt less like uncertainty and more like permission. The sun rose a little higher. The light through the window softened. They didn't get up right away. They didn't plan the day. They didn't analyze or label or explain. They just stayed, and that was enough.